morning. I'm going to tell you about some things that happened this weekend while I was visiting in the Fey Realm. It was, suffice to say, an interesting party. Lots and lots of things to say. So, I suppose I'll just begin with the start of it all. We arrived through the Fey Gates. We'd been told the party required a mask, as it was sort of an incognito setting, you know. People hiding their true identities and such. I was not concerned with magically masking my presence. I didn't take the use of a glamour, a magical disguise. But I did acquire the skull of an ogre, I think. Some kind of green skin. Before making my way through the gate. Something to mask my face, as was the rule. Disobeying rules in the Fey realm is generally a bad idea, especially when you are in the presence of Fey nobility. They don't take kindly to you not playing along with their games. Take them seriously. So I arrived in the Fey realm. Really not difficult to do. We were basically invited. There was an invite out to all mortals who wanted to attend. This invitation stated that they would be participating in a grand masquerade ball hosted by the Winter Court's one and only Lord Finnegan, who we will get to soon. I will tell you about him. Had half an hour to make it through a gate. Arrived. Everybody was masked. Some magically, some not so much. I brought... who did I bring? I brought Croxus and Calryn with me. Two of my swarm mates. Croxus has returned from his warrior trials, and as such is far stronger and full of knowledge of his duties. Calryn, a hunter of my swarm, could only be described as, well, a scavenger, and one with a little bit of a temper. Let's just say. So we were filed into a grand hall. Sat down. Waited for the host to arrive. He wasn't there when we got there. A little rude, if you ask me. Not to be there to greet your guests, but such as it is, I'm not one to complain. Better he's late than we are. Sat around, waited, talked to a few people. Tried to get a bearing of the crowd. A few people I recognized. I even met Dagrin there. For lack of a better word, my leader. A paladin of Sybil. The goddess of the hunt. It was nice to see him again. His presence had been lacking for the last half a year, almost, back in New Linford. And I am not meant to be a leader. Advisor, yes. I can advise with the best of them. But a leader? No. No. Not my strong suit. Regardless, it was nice to see him. And through some trick of magic, the only glamours, the only magical masking of people that affected anything were they affected the true Fae. So we mortals in attendance could see who was who. It wasn't too difficult to start a conversation with some people that I knew. Aeryn and Iman, the weaver of Sybil, traveling together, spoke to them, spent a lot of time with them over the weekend. Good. Yeah. Anyway, Lord Finnegan made his entrance not a few moments later. And it was indicative of the way the rest of the evening was going to go. A royal announcer of some sort stepped forward and, shouted out, now introducing His Grand Majesty, the one, the only, and then Lord Finnegan kicked in a door and shouted, me, and indicated to himself, striding through the hall while everyone is silent, demanding applause, and so forth. That was definitely interesting. He turned out to be, as most Winter Court are, a cruel individual. Bent on some rather interesting entertainment. There were two major competitions during the evening. There was a bardic tournament of some sort, and a martial competition. So, of course, my two companions, Croxus and Calrin, entered the martial competition, as did Aeryn. Myself, I thought I would try my hand at the bardic competition. Best to try and get the rewards that we can. After all, the whole reason I was there was to try and gather some scrolls, magic items, things that might help us in the coming days. So I'd been talking to a merchant, and it seemed to me, a Fey merchant there, and it seemed to me like we had enough to trade for some of the things I was missing. I've been trying to gather the rest of the scrolls that I needed to fill out my witchcraft spellbook. A restricted magic in my home territory. Something that is difficult to acquire through legal means according to both my tribe's law and town law back home. So I thought the Fey Court would be the perfect place to indulge in my purchases. I had things to trade, valuable trinkets and so forth, but I thought if I could win the Bardic competition, whatever prize there was for that, we could put towards trading for the things we actually wanted. It worked out quite well. The first thing to happen, of course, was, well, the first scheduled thing to happen, of course, was the Bardic competition itself. A few entries. I feel Lord Finnegan perhaps rushed into this competition as we had few entries. I think there would have been more had he waited a little longer. But who am I to tell a Fey Lord no, after all? There were 2 or 3 acts before me. You know, some singing, some storytelling, so forth. What I think these people failed to realize is that entertainment for the Winter Court is not singing and dancing and merrymaking. Entertainment for the Winter Court requires a more bloody approach. And myself, I enjoy that kind of approach. So, my performance was very simple. I stood up at the front of the hall and I said, I need a volunteer who is going to help me with my performance. There was hesitation. Most certainly there was hesitation. But after a moment, Aeryn stepped forward, the Paladin of Sybil, my tribe's current leader, at least locally. Aeryn stepped forward. It was unexpected, as he has never shown interest in my art before, but I just think he didn't want me to have someone else from the audience under my tender care. So he stepped forward and he knelt before me. And I turned to the audience and I said, I'm going to count to 10. Going to count to 10. Then I took my knife and struck Aeryn as I counted. 1, 2, 3, so forth. Up to 5 with the knife, damaging his body. And then I decided I should be a little bit more dramatic, at the very least. Aeryn's a very resilient fellow, so at 5, I stopped for a moment, addressed the crowd again, and said, you see, the real music is in how quiet they can be. Anyone can be stabbed and scream. Not anyone can stay quiet. And so, of course, I moved on to something a little more creative, and I broke every finger on his left hand, one at a time. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, punctuated by his wincing. But he never cried out. Goal achieved, I would say. And that was my performance. Very simple, but very in the taste of the Winter Court. Very in the taste of pain and destruction and death. Everyone else singing these Fae songs of hope and summer and sailing and nice things. That's not Winter Court entertainment. So of course, I won the competition. As the only judge was the Winter Court Lord, Lord Finnegan. It isn't as if we got to choose as a group who was going to win. That was the gamble I made, and it paid off. Went quite well, actually. The reward, unfortunately, wasn't anything useful, but it was valuable. A lute made from the horns and bones, the construction of such, of wood fae. A morbid instrument, but suitable when you think about the Winter Court, obviously. I traded it away. I traded it away to the Fae trader that was there, the true Fae merchant of some kind. His name is Lord Deep Vault. It was valuable enough that I managed to acquire a few scrolls, rounding out the rest of what I needed. I had achieved my personal goals for this event, for this party, within the first maybe hour or two. So there wasn't really a lot that I needed to do after that. The rest was indulgence and conversation. But of course, there were very interesting parts of the event that I'll go into. The martial tournament was the next thing to happen. A competition of strength of arms. As I said, the Winter Court enjoyed their blood and violence, and as such, watching people stab each other and so on. Exactly their kind of fun. All of the Gen Vespin, my tribe, the Wasp tribe, that were in attendance, participated in the martial tournament. Other than myself. I'm not a fighter. I'm a speaker. So there were 3 of them in the tournament. Daegrin, the Paladin of Sybil, Croxus, the Warrior, and Calrin, the Hunter. As expected, they did very well. The first thing to happen during the martial tournament was that there were a lot of entrants. There were many people who wanted to participate in the martial tournament. Apparently not so popular, a little bit more popular than the Bardic competition. So to thin the crowd, Lord Finnegan demanded that there be a grand melee. That's always interesting. It shows the real strength of a tribe and the unity of its members when, during a grand melee of 14 or 15 people, everyone else fights each other, and the 3 Gen Vespin team up. the last 4 people standing were one lucky human and the 3 Gen Vespin when Lord Finnegan called for a halt and turned the last 4 into 2 brackets of 2 and then a final. Interesting, to say the least. The human was dispatched off quickly by Aeryn in his bracket, his spear penetrating the man's armor in instants. It didn't take long. Then the other fight was very interesting. Croxus against Aeryn. Croxus decided that this would be an entertaining fight. Try and keep things interesting. Use his shield and sword rather than his daggers. The fight was definitely intense. The 2 of them pulled no punches, and I would not say that... I don't know how to word this. I think it is the most martially adept fight that I've seen in the time that I've been around. The 2 of them going at it was... well, I can't describe it in anything other than that it was excellence, skill. As expected from Gen Vespin, of course. The 2 of them were both wearing down by the end of it, very close to death. And then the last hit from both of them that landed knocked them both to the floor. It ended in a tie. Both down at the same time. I wasn't sure how the Fey Lord was going to call it, but he certainly seemed amused, so goal achieved. In the end, the final fight was resolved by... a duel between the 3 Gen Vespin. Aeryn won in the end, but the whole thing was... it was a moot point anyway. The reward was a magic weapon. The aura of magic applied to a weapon that already existed, an enchantment, which is a valuable thing, because magic is the only thing that can hurt undead. Aeryn would have won it, and he would have gotten a magical weapon. But he's a paladin, so his weapon is already automatically magic. Just the way that paladins work, they have a sort of a spirit-linked weapon. So he delegated the prize be given to Croxus, the 2nd place person. Really, it all goes back to the tribe. The 3 Gen Vespin were the last ones standing, and so we won. I would say that there wasn't a single competition that we didn't sweep up during the night. Myself for the Bardic, them for the Martial. And there was one other competition in the night, but it'll come up later. There was only one event that we didn't participate in, and that was the farce that Lord Finnegan called a hunt He called it a grand hunt. All he did was let loose a bunch of wood fae that he'd captured in the hall and watched some of the less prideful idiots, people who had no self-respect, to call it a hunt. I mean, chase those wood fae around and, from my perspective, kill them. Apparently they let some of them go, I heard, after the fact, but either way, it doesn't really matter to me. A hunt requires patience and time and strategy and many other things that are not present in the idea of just letting some wood fae loose in your hall. So we abstained from that particular merriment. There were some interesting mechanics to the social dynamic of the event. Everybody was given these tokens. Green tokens and red tokens. When somebody was nice to you or did something you appreciated or felt that you should reward someone, you gave them a green token. And when someone offended you or insulted you or generally didn't do something that you wanted to be a part of, you gave them a red token. This was some kind of game that lasted the entirety of the event. And at the end of the night, Lord Finnegan tallied these things. So throughout the entire proceedings, we were getting green and red tokens. More green than red. More green than red because of all the competitions that we'd won. Martial competition, bardic competition. The Lord was handing them out by the handful to us, basically. And we were hoping we'd win that as well. There was no explicit rule ever stated about pooling your resources on this particular challenge. So we ended up just giving all of our green tokens over to Daegrin, our leader. And he did win at the end of the night, having an astounding 10 more green tokens than any person else in attendance, at 38. Well, more than 10, even. And that granted him a favor from the Fey Lord. That was the prize for having the most tokens. The prize for having the most red tokens was, of course, to gain the Wood Fae vulnerability to iron for the next 30 days. Not a fantastic reward for being offensive. But we all knew that that particular one wouldn't turn out well. Finnegan also decided that those people who had one token of each green and red, who didn't participate in the activity, would be punished as well, but I don't know what happened to them. There was only one. That about sums up the activities of the night. However, there were things that were unscheduled and interesting. There were beings in attendance that dwarfed the power of any mortal thing. Though we only learned halfway through the evening that they were there, or one of them was there, anyway. Lord Finnegan got very agitated about something. I'm not sure what the trigger for this was, because I wasn't concerned by this particular guest. But he unmasked himself, eventually, removing his golden mask and showing that he was, I'm not sure that I would say the god of Vesemir, the god of natural death and time. He was certainly an aspect of this god, or an avatar, or something of the sort. He was there in the Fae party. I'm not sure that it was the god in its entirety, as I don't believe that that sort of thing could be beheld. But the god Vesmir was in attendance. Lord Finnegan was, of course, notably upset by this. He's used to being the most powerful thing in the room, and he was downplayed by the presence of this god. I noticed this. Everyone flocked around Vesmir to ask him questions or speak directly to this deity. And Lord Finnegan was sitting at his throne on the far end of the room, completely without guests to look upon him, to help him maintain his ego. So I thought it would be best, rather than to speak to the god at this point in time, to go and talk to Lord Finnegan, our host, person who currently was feeling slighted, and it was better to, keep him happy as well. Yes, the god is powerful. Yes, the god is here in the court. Yes, it's a deity, and you want to speak to it. But keep in mind whose house you're in. It isn't the god's house. So I went to Lord Finnegan, who was upset, pacing around, and generally irritated by the presence of this thing. Clearly wanted them gone. And I said, "My lord, if I may offer some advice, none of this is important. He is here in attendance of your party, a party that you are hosting. He decided was interesting enough to come to." Lord Finnegan nodded and said, yes, but I don't want him here. This isn't the place for the gods. This is the Fae. This is the Fae realm. He's not welcome here. And he says, "Oh, I'm going to abide by the rules of hospitality, and I'm going to let him stay. I don't like it, but I'm going to let him stay." And I think he, more than wanting to abide by any rules of hospitality, he was worried. He left Vesmir there because there really wasn't anything he could do. But in me trying to assuage his doubts, his worries, and his ego, I think he felt a little better, and I managed to get some green tokens out of it, so it turned out well for me. Besides, with all the people surrounding Vesmir, what was the point of going over there and trying to talk to him? Impossible. The evening wore on. I spoke to some friends from the local area. And nothing of note really happened for a few hours. It was a party. Taught them, some people there, who I recognized and who I remembered, I taught them how to play some Gen Vespin games to pass the time. You may all be familiar. I can't show you, but you'd put your hand down on the table. Someone else would do the knife work. And if you pulled your hand away or they messed up the order, the rhythm of the whole thing, then the turn switched and you do the knife work and they put their hand down. Simple pastime. Simple pastime. We found out there was another being in attendance that was at least shocking to me. I kept my nose out of the business of everybody who was doing these clandestine things, like trying to run down into the Lord's vaults and steal things. Things that you don't do to the host of a party. Things that you try and avoid when you watch him obliterate someone's soul with a point of his finger. And yes, we watched that happen. He killed a fae that annoyed him, that was there without his want. Pointed at her, and she was gone. As if she never existed. Dust. Why would you want to upset someone with that kind of power? But nevertheless, they did. They decided that the things that were down there were too valuable not to risk the Lord's wrath. At one point, they caught an orc who had been sneaking around downstairs. Now, Finnegan had already been very upset, killed a few people for their slights and so forth. And I don't know why, but I was in a charitable mood. And I thought I would try and save this orc's life. If only because it would be fun for me. And so Lord Finnegan is angrily yelling at this orc, and I step forward, and having won some favor with Lord Finnegan at this point, I had some means to sort of speak up without angering him. And I said, "My lord, I think what would be more interesting than having him killed is to watch him dance." And Lord Finnegan laughed and nodded. So the thing with orcs is that they're weak to anything that affects their mind. Even a simple thing that would usually just make them your friend dominates them and allows you to give them any order that you want. And so, using my magic, I charmed this orc, dominating him, essentially. And told him to turn around, face Lord Finnegan. You know, like a robot, he, uncontrolling of his body, turned and faced Lord Finnegan. I said, "Dance for him." And the orc started to dance. He had no choice. No choice at all. He had to do what I said. And just to prove that that was the case, while he was dancing, I said, "Stop." He stopped. "Pick up your dagger." He did so. "Stab yourself 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Easy. I could have told him to fall upon his own sword, or slit his throat, or anything of that nature, and he would have had to do it. But the idea was to prevent his death. And so I looked at Lord Finnegan and I said, "Will there be anything further that you want from this orc?" He was like, "No, just sit him down in that chair over there." So I told him to go and sit, and once the spell wore off, he was free to move. He wasn't very happy with me. I could tell, looking at him from across the room, that he was particularly upset that I had done this, but I did it for a good reason. It kept his head from the chopping block. I don't think he ever really realized that. So, we came to the last parts of the evening. Lord Finnegan was getting more and more agitated at Vesmir's presence, and Vesmir was saying some things that, made Lord Finnegan angry. But the real straw that broke the back of our Fey host was they stole a dragon egg. The purple is it purple? Yes, the purple dragon. Isilt, who had all but died recently from something. I'm not sure what all of it is, but dragons are an incredible force in the world. On par, if not stronger than gods. Individually. He had stolen a dragon egg from his vault. The purple egg. Trying to rescue Isilt. Some draconic worshippers trying to rescue Isilt from the clutches of Lord Finnegan's vault. And I can understand that. Freeing your god, so to speak. But it definitely didn't lead to Finnegan being very rational. And he made sweeping declarations upon the party that he would start killing people indiscriminately if his egg was not returned. I saw the actual physical egg trade hands a few times. But I wasn't about to speak up. Finnegan wasn't thinking rationally, and if I pointed at someone or said that I knew where it was, he would probably just strike me down. A man with a temper. I had thought that the egg was where Isilt was, but apparently some form of her, some Fey form of her existed at the party, an avatar or something. I'm not sure of the details, but suffice to say she was free from the shell of her egg. And she revealed herself as a purple-haired woman that had been in attendance the entire night. Well, most of it, I think. And she said to Lord Finnegan that she wouldn't be staying. And that he would die. And that she would leave. All of that kind of thing. At this party, there was an argument between a Lord of the Fae, a god, and a dragon. These are the three most powerful beings I have ever known. And they were all there, yelling at each other and saying they'll kill everyone, so forth. And so everyone is about to band together with Vesmir and Isilt to escape the Fey realm, to kill Lord Finnegan and escape. I think was the goal of most of the people there. I didn't share that goal, as if I was left to leave, I would do so. I had achieved everything I wanted to. I have no hand in this politics game. But just as Lord Finnegan was about to strike everybody down, and we were about to try and fight him, Vesmir stopped time to monologue a little. Everybody was frozen. And I remember it very blurry. As if it were moving very fast. Vesmir speaking to Lord Finnegan. Vesmir speaking to Isilt. Lord Finnegan was frozen. Vesmir speaking to Isilt. And Isilt saying back some things. Talking about how they needed to team up so that they could escape this place. Destroy Lord Finnegan and leave before anything could happen. Isilt was rightly not very trusting of a god. Dragons and gods have never gotten along, ever. They are enemies. They are opposite sides of the same coin, even more so than light and dark. Gods of light and gods of dark would team up to fight dragons. But eventually they came to some kind of accord after Isilt had shown that she had the power to sever Vesmir's divinity if she wanted to. The god was injured by this dragon. In some way. As I said, it's all very blurry. Very fast and hard to perceive. I was frozen at the time. So I think it's fair to say I don't have an exact recounting of the event. But the two of them agreed to team up and leave this place. Vesmir released his hold on time, and we fought our way past the Fey Lord to one of his portals to leave. The portals, however, were not working. Finnegan had disappeared and shut off our exits. The fight went on for a little while, sometime every guest wanting to escape. Eventually, some tear was opened, some portal, some rip in the fabric of Fey reality that Isilt escaped through. After this happened, we went back to the main hall while everybody else was speaking to Vesmir. When I say we, I mean the Gen Vespin and Iman, the Lightweaver of Sybil. And we made our way back to the main hall and acquired some things that people had left behind, valuables, so forth, that they had abandoned on tables and chairs and all the places that they'd got up from to fight. Leave something behind? Apparently you don't care about it. Calrin was quick to search the whole place and disappear things into their cloak. When everybody came back upstairs, they were with Vesmir still. He hadn't left, and he was unmasked. And he sat right nearby to where I was sitting. So I thought we would take the opportunity to speak to him, myself and the swarm. Croxus asked an interesting question of the god. When was he going to die? Or how? And Vesmir, of course, said he couldn't say exactly how or exactly when, as there are many paths in the future and places that you can go that you don't expect, or branches where you have to choose, so forth. The future is not solid, not written. It isn't fate. But he did tell Croxus that he would die in service. And Croxus took that to mean he would have a bloody death. A violent death. I think he was happy with that. But the god turned to me and he asked if I had anything to say. And so I asked him the same question, as I couldn't think of anything really relevant at the time. It's not often you get asked to ask something by a god. And I said, well, if Croxus is interested in how he dies, then I would be interested to see what you think about how I will die. And he looks at me pointedly, as if he knows exactly what I'm talking about, and says, there are many roads that you could take. The one that you're on, the one laid out before you, the one that you seem intent on following, is going to be horrible and violent and bloody. You will die unhappy. And I looked back at him and I reached out a hand. And I said, I'd like to talk more privately. Do you mind if I touch you? And He, of course, said, "No, of course, go ahead," knowing there's not really anything I could do to a god. And so I reached out and I cast a mind meld spell on Vesmir. That was an experience. I believe he held back a lot of what he could have presented to me. He could have destroyed me in that moment. But we had a private conversation telepathically, basically, where I spoke frankly about my practice of witchcraft and that you can't change the choices that you make in that regard after the fact, and that there's a long shadow looming over me. He seemed to understand and said something about it not being his war and he didn't care what I did. I was quite sure this god of good, well, natural death, I suppose, and time and fate, was going to kill me in that moment, knowing I was corrupt or evil or whatever people always say about people who do bad things. But he didn't seem to share that opinion. Not so zealous as to want to destroy everything that opposes his particular whims and views. A private conversation with a god, now that's something that doesn't happen very often to those who are not favored. Eventually, Vesmir sent us home. Waited until his power had returned after being severed by a silt, the purple dragon, and then created his own portal to his realm, the Deadlands, and then sent us to where we needed to go from there. But not before I had a frank and honest conversation with the Lightweaver, Amon, the Wood Fae, who I don't see very often, but who is very connected to my leader, Aeryn. I told her about everything that I did. Everything that I've done and that I will do. The bad things. The things people would condemn me for. The things that people believe that I choose to do of whim, but that I do for reasons that help them in the end. She was, interestingly, very understanding. As a weaver, not a paladin, as a weaver of the hunt, she wasn't under any duress to kill me for being bad or breaking a law. As long as I wasn't corrupting nature, she was happy. I think I made her question some of her own morals while we were talking. There's nothing I like more than having a frank conversation, a conversation that both sides are interested in the resolution of, even though it may be difficult. There's no better way to try and change someone's mind than to be open to the idea of changing your own. So as long as I'm not corrupting nature, I'm safe from her at least. She's the more rational of the pair, however. And telling Aeryn what I'm doing, telling the paladin of Sybil what I'm doing may be a little more difficult. A month or two, and I'll have another chance. I told him I needed to speak to him frankly about something. And I think he'll be expecting the conversation. So we'll see. We will see.